I think it is now time to start the third day of our food security forum, and it's a pleasure to welcome all of you back, and it's also a pleasure to welcome those of you who are with us for the first time. I would like to start, well, let me introduce myself first. I'm Kerstin Stendal. I'm with UNEP, and together with Ling Xu and team, we have been organizing this forum. And it is fair to say that we have been very impressed by the 2 past days of discussions. It's been extremely insightful, and it also has pointed us to the fact that we have a lot of work to do, but that we really have the elements for putting things right. Let me very quickly provide you with a recap of what we heard and discussed yesterday. Day 2 yesterday focused on agrobiodiversity and smallholder resilience. And Susan Gardner, director of the Ecosystems Division in UNEP, kicked us off in her video message by highlighting several of the aspects that were later picked up by panelists and speakers. Dr. Bernadette P. Resurrection, in her keynote speech, highlighted the urgent need for a social ontology of connection based on mutuality and trust, and the fact that we need to include the ecosystems and non-humans in the structure of care. She called for an intersectional social justice between the myriad species. And the panelists ably responded to this clarion call. So what we saw was a very fruitful day, full with latest updates, thoughts and experience of on-the-ground actions around issues related to agrobiodiversity, smallholder farmers, policy instruments, governance, gender, in the face of climate change and COVID-19, in the global context, as well as within the global south. Food transformation is absolutely necessary, and we cannot forget the smallholder farmers in this transformation, because they are the majority of food producers, especially in the global south, as well as central to conserving crop diversity. In terms of food security, the world's hunger is still increasing, yet it is not solely caused by insufficient food production. And we will need to address the way the food is produced, distribution patterns, and how and what we consume. Across the world, large-scale modern agriculture severely threatens smallholder farmers who depend on agroforestry, integrated farming, practices that are more women-centric. In fact, women account for double the agricultural labor worldwide, and the number is growing. So there are still gender gaps in farm productivity owned by women and smallholder agriculture in general. And this situation is worsened by climate change and COVID-19. Some of these gaps are because of structural challenges, such as social norms and domestic violence. While highlighting the challenges, the session also gave us several inspiring examples of how to successfully empower women, employ local wisdom, conserve bioculture with native varieties, empower communities with self-driven mindsets, and mobilize support from science and good governance. Some of these examples have resulted in biodiversity conservation and livelihood benefits at scale. One particular topic that we discussed was the importance of community seed banks at local level. And we also had an interesting expose of the global seed vault. and which the primary intention of which is for genetic diversity conservation in times of climate change and social instability to be preserved. And we also discussed that the fact that this can also support smallholder and marginalized farmers during times of crisis, and such as the COVID-19 lockdown. This is especially in the crucial times of the planting seasons. Another important but less discussed topic was the link between land tenure security and ability to produce food more sustainably. It has been recognized that land tenure plays a vital role in protecting natural resources and women's equality. Thus, local actions by communities need to be scaled up in order to strengthen rights to land tenure for female farmers. As a conclusion, we heard that the world needs solidarity for agrobiodiversity conservation, so that smallholder of farmers and gender consideration can be high on the agenda for policy support and in order to create large-scale sustainable results. I recognize that this is a tall order, but I also recognize that we have heard over the last couple of days that we do have the tools and the knowledge to do this. Today in our forum, we will be focusing on food system transformation. And yet again, we have an impressive set of speakers, facilitators, and panelists. Before we set off, let me remind you of a couple of practicalities. Please note that we have a questions and answers box also for this session, and I urge you to post any questions you may have so that they can be picked up during the panel discussions. Also, we will post all of the presentations on the forum website. So I would encourage you and ask those of you who have not yet shared your presentations with us to please do so that we have a complete set we can share with the wider world. And now let me turn to today's keynote address. It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Satu Santala, who is the Director General for the Department of Development Policy at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, and Finland's International Development Association Deputy for the World Bank. Prior to her current role, Satu was in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Satu was Executive Director from Finland at the World Bank, where she represented Denmark, Estonia, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Sweden. In addition to several earlier positions in Finland's Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Satu has also held numerous roles with the Finnish Red Cross, including as an international training coordinator. Over to you, Satu. It is with great anticipation we look forward to your keynote address this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerstin, and I'm very pleased to be invited to be with you today and humbled. I was very impressed to hear your recap of your very impressive conversations so far. I will put up my presentation here. And I will share some thoughts with you, and of course look forward to hearing your comments and views also in the chat throughout my intervention. First of all, when we talk about food systems, we see them as very complex constructions, and there are no simple solutions for their transformation. Food systems consist of the traditional farm to fork chain, but it also includes its governance, policy, health, and technological drivers. In a food system approach, we look at the interactions of the system with the environment, as well as at the outcomes of the system. We're also interested in the use of energy and other resources in the system, and various wastes, losses, and byproducts. And my first main message for you today is that that currently our local, national, and global food systems are unable to generate the expected outcomes. When food systems function well, they produce food security and good nutrition for all, as well as decent livelihoods, employment, and income for all food system actors, and they do it with minimal harmful impact on the environment. And my view is that this is currently not fully the case. So I would like to hear how you see this. You're seeing the poll coming up now. And my question to you is, what do you consider the biggest challenges of current food systems? My options are unable to secure enough nutritious food for all. Number 2, unhealthy consumption patterns. Number 3, negative impacts on the environment. Number 4, lack of inclusiveness and equality. And I hope you can answer this question right now, and then we'll get the results come up. I realize that now that I'm sharing my screen, I cannot hear or see the results, so maybe someone can just tell them to me when they're done.
Yes, I am sure our technical team will come in as we have the results.
Good. I hope you're able to the functionality works, so you're able to answer.
Yes, and here we are, Satu. So what we hear is 48% said unable to secure enough nutritious food for all. That's the biggest challenge. 8% said unhealthy consumption patterns is the biggest challenge. 13% said negative impacts on the environment. 31% said lack of inclusiveness and equality.
Thank you. Very interesting. I guess depending a little bit on the audience, the balance might differ, but at least it seems that all of these were considered to be somewhat major problems of the current systems. Thank you very much for answering and for sharing your views on this. I do think that that challenges to the food systems are manifold, and they're also interconnected. And the changes we need to make in our food systems are so wide and manifold that we can really talk about transforming the entire systems. To advance the transformation in a fair manner, we need to understand and address these challenges in our current systems. And this is really my second main message, that in order to fix the problem, the problems, we really need to understand these and address these current challenges. And we must consider simultaneously all aspects of sustainability, the environmental, social, and economic aspects. Food systems transformation also requires unprecedented coordination and collaboration between different stakeholders, sectors, and levels of governance. And this is my third main message. So really, this cannot be done in isolation by any individual actor. Food systems at local, national, and global level interact with each other. Changes in one system are usually reflected in other systems, and global environmental threats, as well as trade, connects all food systems. Public, private, and civil society actors are also needed, all needed to jointly work towards and towards fair and sustainable transformation of food systems. In addition, multilateral organizations such as UN agencies and international research organizations play an important role in ensuring that research results, international standards, and environmental and other agreements are incorporated into the food systems. The Nordic countries held joint consultations with UNEP quite recently, and we also jointly expressed our gratitude to UNEP for raising awareness about the environmental aspects of food systems, as UNEP is the leading global environmental authority and has a key role in promoting implementation of SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production. Environmental challenges in food systems such as deforestation, climate change, and loss of biodiversity all need urgent action. Sustainable use of natural resources maintains ecosystem services, prevents environmental degradation, and increases food systems resilience. UNEP, together with ongoing global efforts, especially the CDB COP15 and the Climate COP26, contribute to the common goal of strengthening member states' capacity in integrating environmental and ecosystem services and national development plans and increasing food systems resilience. Then a few words about people as part in connection to food systems. The resilience of our food systems has just been tested during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that has emerged as an extra burden on many already stretched systems. The pandemic is far from being over, and its full impact on people's food and nutrition security and livelihoods is still to be seen. The COVID-19 pandemic has also highlighted the necessity for collaboration between various stakeholders, including FAO and WHO. But food system transition must be fair and equitable for all. We need to identify vulnerable groups who are particularly threatened by food insecurity, and the COVID pandemic has really highlighted this. There are gender-based inequalities, and I heard that you've discussed this extensively during these days, but there are also other groups whose voices do not usually get heard. To make process inclusive, we need to take into consideration people with disabilities, the youth, elderly, smallholders, and rural workers, and so forth. In the recap earlier, I didn't really hear much discussion about disability, so let me say a few words about that. You may be surprised and think this is not very relevant when we talk about food systems. However, it's estimated that 15% of the world population, about 1 billion people, live with some form of impairment or disability. So it's a major group of people. Persons with disabilities are among the most marginalized in any crisis-affected community and are disproportionately affected by disaster and conflict situations. It's tragic to say that people with disabilities have likely been, again, most affected by the ongoing COVID pandemic. Disability can significantly affect household food and nutrition security, as households with a breadwinner with a disability are often more vulnerable to shocks and have less capacity to cope with food crisis. In terms of community-based food and nutrition programs, people with disabilities may experience obstacles in registering for the programs or accessing nutrition centers. In some cases, families or communities may place a lower status on a disabled person and prioritize nutrition and health services for the non-disabled. Children with disabilities are disproportionately represented in many institutions and orphanages, where the quality of food may be an additional problem. Disability can also lead to malnutrition due to a combination of the need for increased nutrients, decreased nutrient intake, and increased nutrient loss. Children with disabilities are consistently reported to have high incidence of malnutrition, stunting, and wasting. So a renewed approach needs to include, at the planning and design stages, rights of persons with disabilities. This needs to be done through mainstreaming these rights into relevant interventions and improve accessibility. Although data can sometimes be scarce, it's central that these dimensions are catered for. We need full and equal participation of persons with disabilities. In practical terms, persons with disabilities and their own organizations need to be fully involved in planning and implementation of programs, building partnerships with organizations of persons with disabilities, arranging consultations and providing spaces, and using experts with disabilities is a must. So then my third main message that I already said about unprecedented need for coherence and collaboration instead of working in silos, even if in connection to food, silos are very useful. Food system transformation requires integrated approaches and improved policy coherence. Currently, food-related issues are governed by several sectoral policies. They often work in silos without common platforms or even goals. Instead of silos, we need comprehensive food policies that integrate fragmented sectoral policies. For instance, the challenge of food loss and waste would merit from improved policy coherence. It's important to raise awareness about the interconnection, including on one hand, the social costs incurred by inefficient and unsustainable use of resources, and on the other, the avoidance of overuse of resources, fertilizers and pesticides, and the associated impact of those on land and water. UNEP has also an important role in promoting the environmental aspects of the interdisciplinary One Health approach, which acknowledges that infectious agents circulate between animals, humans, and ecosystems. Trade and responsible investments are part of the transformation of food systems. COVID-19 pandemic has made the importance of well-functioning trade and markets between and within countries even more visible. Additional responsible investments in food systems are needed, for example, to improve the resilience of food systems in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sharing lessons learned between countries is a good example of collaboration. And this fora is a prime example. Sharing good practices South-South, North-South, and vice versa on different aspects of food systems transformation saves time and resources. South-South cooperation between neighboring countries, for example, on trade could improve food security in both countries. Some lessons can be learned from the North, including goals and practices aiming to improve food safety. This has become even more important in the era of spreading of zoonotic diseases, including COVID-19. So then, I'm coming to the end of my my remarks, and you're seeing a question appear in the question and answers box. So feel free to answer it right now. We are hoping that by the latter half of the next year, meetings will be increasingly in-person meetings, and we are gearing towards the UN Food Systems Summit, which we consider to be a unique opportunity for the entire world to catalyze transformation of food systems and achievement of SDG 2. We see that the summit can contribute towards achieving the SDGs and building more resilient food systems. We need systems that can sustainably deliver healthy diets while protecting our environment and climate, preserving biodiversity and natural resources, and preventing inclusive economic growth. So now I would like to see and hear your comments or your expectations from the summit. So feel free to answer in the Q&A, and I will actually stop sharing my screen so that I can also see the comments.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. This was I thought it was just excellent how you know, during as a start to our third day, you managed to bring in yet other dimensions to our discussions, and your focus on people with disabilities, I think, is something you correctly concluded. It's something that we have not factored in as of yet, and it's something that we need to do. So I think that's something that was extremely important. Also, what you are bringing in now is something that we have been asked also in the chat box by Professor Sidamed about the fact that, you know, where are the solutions? And you know, we have over the last couple of days, we have heard of obstacles, we have heard of challenges, we have heard of the need for a transformation of our food system. But is it realistic to expect that we will be able to do so with the institutions that we have in place at the moment? We know that a lot of the development banks, we know that, you know, the international development community is coming together to, you know, to fund and address what we now see in terms of us falling behind on our implementation of the SDGs, and also this acute need for responses now to communities who are debilitated by COVID-19. And so a first question maybe to you, Satu, you've dealt with, you come from this, you know, from this arena of development assistance and the mechanisms that we have in place. Do you see that we heard you, we need to move from silos to coherence? Do you see that this is something that there is an eagerness to do, and that there is an ability and capacity for us to be able to do so? I know this is a very tricky question. It would be really interesting to hear from you how you feel the discussions are going at the moment within the development assistance communities.
Thank you. As you say, this is a very difficult question, and I don't really, I'm not sitting sort of with a total understanding and overview of what everyone is doing and thinking. But I think one of the silver linings with the COVID pandemic is that many of these interconnected challenges are becoming underlined and heightened, and I think there is a deeper understanding that how things are connected and how they need to be solved in unison. It's of course very difficult to do in practice, and different actors are sort of playing various roles and taking different pieces of the responsibility. I do think that the Food System Summit is really an opportunity, and I do hope that we will all work together on getting to some of the real solutions and really the coordination issues in that context. Of course, no one meeting can ever solve such tremendous challenges, but it can help with bringing more visibility and bringing more discipline to coordinating and coming together. And I have, when I speak with different, well, for example, I know that within the World Bank, there is a very serious effort to bring the One Health approach to various programs. Various UN agencies are very serious about working together to solve these challenges. So I'm encouraged, but it's a huge effort where we all need to work together.
Thank you. And yes, agreed. And I think also what we need to do, and I think this is on all of us working within the international arena as well, is is to let go of some of our, some of our organizational self-interests in coming to results, and really looking at the common good, and that sometimes takes compromises, and it sometimes takes stepping a bit further away from the limelight and in the interest of collaboration. And I think that's a cultural shift that we also need to have within international collaboration. But I agree with you. I think COVID is shining the light on our deficiencies, and hopefully that will help us also regroup our thinking. When it comes to questions in the Q&A, there is an interesting one, which about which criteria can you does one use when saying a country has a problem with food shortage, or doesn't have it. So how do you define a country with food shortage?
This does not fall within my expertise. I'm sure there's someone else in the audience who has a better expertise on this. I think, for example, the WFP and FAO have criteria for this, which I don't know in detail. So, I can't answer this question. I know the criteria exist.
Very good, thank you. So, if anyone wants to come in at this point to also discuss this question, otherwise we can also leave it for the panelists to address. I would say that with this, I don't see many expectations for the food summit. So I guess this is something that we will need to focus much more attention on, making sure that we all know what is at stake, and using the food summit to address it. So I guess that's really now on the to-do list for all of us as we gear up for those discussions. Thank you very much, Satu. It was a pleasure having you, and I hope you can stay on for a little while. I know that these are busy times, and we will certainly follow up on what we have learned over the last couple of days, also with you. It's I hope we can continue our collaboration.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to listen for a little while more. Thank you.
Thank you. So now moving on to the next part of our forum today, and I am delighted to introduce our moderator for our first panel session. And this is Patty Fong, who is the Program Director for Climate and Health and Wellbeing at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. The Alliance is one of 28 foundations working together and with others to transform global food systems now and for future generations. Patty brings 2 decades of experience with strategic philanthropy in climate and sustainability. Prior to her role at the Global Alliance, she was Program Director and founding CEO at the European Climate Foundation, a major philanthropic initiative established by several global foundations, where she led the strategy development and implementation of the portfolio on energy efficiency and on buildings and urban systems, which includes a focus on social justice and human rights dimensions of clean energy transitions. Also, early on in her career, Patty helped launch and manage the Energy Foundation's China Sustainable Energy Program, the first major philanthropic initiative on climate and energy in China. Over to you, Patty, for what I know will be interesting discussions.
Thank you, Kerstin. It's my pleasure to be here and to facilitate this panel. So we are joined by 4 experts that I'm pleased to introduce. First, we have Dr. Fidel Jame. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing any of the names. We also have Dr. Bingfang Wu, as well as Dr. Abid Suleri, and finally, Mr. Domingos Zafanias Go. First, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fidel Jame, who is Deputy President of the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. His work involves aligning and integrating AGRA's investments with the interventions of national governments and other development partners. And prior to joining AGRA, he was Program Director for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in Southern Africa. I encourage all those who are listening in to type their comments or their questions in the Q&A box. We'll go to the questions after all the panelists have spoken. But for now, over to you, Fidel, for your remarks.
Thank you so much, Patty. I would like to share my slide, if you give me just 1 second. Just confirm when you see my slide. And then I'll put it in presentation mode. Can you see me?
Yes, we see your slides.
Thank you so much, Patty. It is really a pleasure. I mean, I had the privilege of listening through the 3 days. I'm just thrilled by the quality of this discussion. But very quickly, given the time that I have, I'm with AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. And for some of you, just to remind you that AGRA was actually set up by the late Kofi Annan, who was then UN General Secretary, with the unique purpose of making sure that Africa is able to drive what he called a uniquely African green revolution. Now, people talk about green revolution, but it's the qualifier. And I think from my discussion, you will see how we're trying to live up to that agenda. So my organization have really set out to show that Africa as a continent can feed itself and feed the world with high quality food by embarking on a journey that moves us from farming as a solitary struggle to survive to a business that thrives. Now, listening to these last 3 discussions, I realized it's a big challenge to do that while maintaining the environment and managing social inequality and delivering all these metrics for all. Now, what I'm going to talk about is basically summarized here. I'm going to say it in 2 minutes so that if I run out of time or I get, for some reason, my internet doesn't work, you know what I wanted to say. Firstly, I think the world, and we heard it from an excellent presentation for Satu, is set to rethink its food system. And I think there are some very amazing ambition of delivering quality food for all, decent job, sustaining the environment, and do it in an inclusive way. That's what I call a very aspirational goal. But this is happening in a context that we cannot ignore. And the key point I hear, it's a context of global poverty not reducing but increasing. It's a context where climate change is eroding all the gain that happened before. But we also, it's a wake-up call for all of us that we cannot continue doing business as usual. And COVID-19 is a reminder that we need to rethink and give priority to resilience. And in my talk, I will give some illustration what it means, because unfortunately, there is no blueprint. We may have one common ambition, but each society have to find the pathway to a global challenge. And I think this is what the success of the Food System Summit will depend on that. I will make a submission around how we're thinking about meeting the triple bottom line. People, planet, and profit. At the heart of the successful Food Summit is our ability to reconcile these 3 parameters. Give some example of how bioeconomy perspective can help in that. And finally, end with some example of cooperation. And just the gist of my message can be captured in an African proverb. I mean, we all know the proverb that if you want to go far, fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, which is the point around cooperation. But there is another African proverb that I want to bring out here, which is a caravan always goes at the speed of the slowest camel. And my question to all of you, who is the smallest camel? Now, this is what I want to talk about. Now, let me go through quickly my presentation. Again, the context, we know about it. And I think one of the parameters is the population is growing fast, very much faster than before. And I think that creates both opportunities and challenges. I think in Africa, we see the growth of our population, the youth has a huge opportunity, but it's a big burden if we can't find a proper answer to the question we're asking here. An example is hunger is on rise on the continent, we know it. And unfortunately, despite all our potential on the continent, 37% of the hungry people live in this continent. The issue of gender inequality cannot be overemphasized. It's amazing how domestic unit and societies are actually foregoing the opportunity and the contribution of significant part of our society. It's something that is mind-blowing, and I think unless we address it, there is no progress that's going to happen. Now, again, climate change, I will not dwell too much into it. It's a reality, and it has a human face. It's generally a woman, a rural woman. It's a big reality across the continent. And it's made worse by everything we've been talking about the last few days, both pests and diseases that are affecting the continent in a very recurrent way and have significant impact on our ability as a continent to meet our objective. Again, it's not only one problem, it's a accumulation of problems. And I think the take-home message here is we may have been caught napping by COVID in terms of preparedness, but we can't afford not to pay attention to the resilience, especially the resilience of smallholder farmers. Now, and this point I've already made, the opportunity we had during this crisis is to work with several African governments on the continent to understand how they're trying to reconcile, on the one hand, saving life, on the other hand, continuing economic activities. And that brought to the fore the nature of the compromises and trade-off that needs to happen, and the need for a resilient strategy. Part of that, we have to pay attention that COVID did not affect everybody the same way. We pay attention on how women, especially women entrepreneurs, have been specifically affected by COVID. This survey will give you an indication. A significant part of them are not sure that they have to shut their businesses. Another significant part is not able to make investment. So this is real, and it means something for certain segment of our, Throughout these 3 days, we've been trying to articulate what is required, and I will not go too much around that, but I think the agenda of resilience, as we all understand it, entails empowering people, countries, and nations to increase their absorptive capacity, to improve their adaptive capacity, but also their transformative capacity. The yesterday discussion, just to give an example, brought the significance of agroecology in helping enhance the absorptive capacity. But also the issue of the indigenous varieties, the drought-tolerant variety, everything that is held by our local communities, that has become a significant resource to deal with the challenge that we have today. Finally, issue of policy. None of these things will happen if we don't have proper policy and institutional reform. We have to do that with the new ambition, which is inclusivity, environmental sustainability, resilience, economic viability, and mutual accountability. These are the parameters. And I think the presentation we heard earlier set it very nicely for all of us. How would it look like to support women? We need, first of all, voice. They have to speak for themselves. They have to be able to articulate their own vision of what success is, and they need to be supported to access these opportunities at the village, continent, and global level. Some practices are there, not elaborate too much. African government and all of the government have been trying to respond to COVID, and some of the most prominent things that we saw are subsidy program, making sure that there is access to input, using digital. Technology is a big deal here, because one of the big challenges that COVID revealed is we have no data. Most of the government don't understand what is the magnitude of the problem, what the opportunities are. And this is where ICT and digital play enable some significant creative responses. So these are just few examples. What is required is what we call a triple bottom line approach, where all, and the idea of cooperation was articulated very well earlier, have to come together to build a more gender inclusive, environmental sustainable, and economic viable system. This is the paradigm shift. The biggest opportunity of this crisis is to realize that we cannot continue business as usual. And the parameters are here. I will not go too much. Local is important, short value chain, which have local control, empowering people to unlock value based on their own knowledge, wisdom, and resources, enabling regional trade, but also creating a standard for cooperation. Bioeconomy could be a concept we can all explore. I mean, and basically the question is, how can you reconcile care and utilization of natural resources? Can we go away from the grab and run logic, which is the dominant logic, despite all the narrative around a human family? The reality is completely different. Can we reconcile nature and profit? Can we reconcile inclusion and competitiveness? What does this imply for all of us? We are doing some work in this line, and I want to highlight the collaboration we have with the Global Environmental Facility, but also with UNEP in Kenya and other countries to try to bring together these opportunities. It requires collaboration across the board. These are just examples of what we're talking about. In the end, South-South cooperation can be a big resource. Around issue of women, issue across the board can be worked on through solidarity. There are great examples where we are tapping into resources from other countries. This is an example of collaboration with the Chinese Academy of Science, which has enabled African government to have access to data to be able to provide evidence-based policy making. Another example is a collaboration with IBRAF, the Brazil Africa Institute, that is availing technical content using digital formula. In the end, and this I'm going to conclude, we can go far, we can go together, but we need to understand who is the slowest camel. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fidel. And I'm eager to come back to you in the end to kind of start stimulating a discussion amongst the group, those listening in on all the work that you've been doing. But let's move on to the next second panelist. Next, we have Dr. Bingfang Wu, who is currently professor of aerospace information at the Aerospace Information Research Institute at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. His research interest includes remote sensing technologies or methodologies and applications in agriculture, water resource, and ecosystem, especially in the monitoring of crops, evapotranspiration, and drought. He and his team have developed remote sensing-based operational monitoring systems with novel technologies as crop watch since 1992. And Fidel, you mentioned that's one of your last slides, some of the work that the Chinese Academy of Sciences has been doing. So I'm assuming that you have been in touch with Dr. Wu. So Dr. Wu, we look forward to hearing from you about all the work that you've been doing. Over to you.
Thank you for your introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here to give a presentation and give more elaborations on the Global Watch, so maybe we can find some opportunity to share and also working together on this. And my topic is on the Global Watch, on the ownership and the transparency for the developing countries.
Dr. Wu, we are seeing your shared screen, but we're seeing the presenter view rather than the audience view. And
播放模式，你现在是你自己的。刚才第一张可以，现在等于是你把两个都放这儿了。
是把这个放进来是吧？
把播放的模式，你现在是两个，把你背景的也在里头吧。
播放模式，我看看，这样是不是挺好的？
现在是两页在一起了，不是播放模式。
我知道，但是我不知道怎么去的这。 好了吗？
好了，这样就这样可以。
好。
Yeah.
So for the food protection is always as a suggest. Sometimes there's a climate availability, sometimes also pest or disease, or the food protection of the changes from year to year. Therefore, monitor the crop is quite essential for the early production forecasting and sorry. Can help the policymakers to make evidence-based trade decisions, and also can in-season monitoring also can help farmers to better farm management. And early warning information also can help early response actions on providing food aid or food trade on those. Therefore, so many countries to develop their own crop monitoring systems using satellite data in order to improve the food information availability and the charter balancing. However, in most of developing countries, because of lack of financial support and also the technical skills, so most developing countries lack of capacity in obtaining and accessing these informations, and it's harder for them to develop their own systems for that. And so they have to rely on the third parties, which will provide some dangerous or risks for taking decisions based on the delayed or not verified information provided by the third party or by others. Therefore, they need their own ownership global monitoring systems. Here we develop a global program. Before we developed this for ourselves, for China, but since 2013, so we're moving the entire CloudWatch platform to the cloud, and this can provide additional reliable information for developing countries to fight against hunger. And also since we are moving to the cloud, so we can provide a cloud facility to enhance the capacity for developing countries on the global monitoring by themselves in order to improve the food information availability, quality, and the transparencies. So here's an overview of a CloudWatch in the Alibaba Cloud. There are 4 components. For the first component is data processing. The data we need can be automatically to converging and pre-processed in the cloud, and it's depend on who is the users. You can download or moving the data for your own region or for the globally once you need it, and this process is automatically done. When we did it for the global processing, the data processing is only take 1 day for the globally for the for TB data set for all this. So it's a very efficient of this. So and the second, this one of the data pre-processing, that we produce 32 indicators for the agroclimate, economicals, and early warning indicators. And these indicators are you can be automatically to using default, or you can set up your own parameters or calibrate your own parameters in order to meet the local conditions of this. And the second component is data management or explorations. All these indicators, 32 indicators, are in the databases, and they can be in the cloud-based databases, and also can be explored and download for your own region or for your interesting area. And also, CloudWatch also allow the people working together to do the analysis. This analysis allow the users or stakeholders to do the analysis using the information indicated from the cloud to your own regions, or you can working together with others for the global, or for the regional or African continentals working together. Here is we are working for the global, so from global analysis. So we invite the experts from over 34 countries working together with us. To someone responsible for chapter, someone responsible for their own country, for their sections. Here's we are doing for the global analysis, from global to the regional, to the national and subnationals. At the global levels, we are mostly focused on the agroclimate. We are using for the indicators, and down to the major producing zones like North America or West Africans. There are 6 major producing zones in the world. Then we are given more information except for agroclimate indicators. We put 4 or 5 more agronomic indicators to see how farmers working their own land in order to respond to the climate impact. Then also we are taking 43 countries as key countries to analysis, because these 43 countries is more than produce more than 80% of global food, and also more than 80% of export of the food. These solid countries, and also we are including some more countries from Africa to see how on the food security who are facing food security issues. And in some of highlight indicators, the global information can provide early warning indicators on the global upland fluctuations. At the early stage of a growing stages, we can identify how much of the cropland are used for the current season for the global production. So this is a very strong signal for the food security early warnings. And also we are follow the agrometeorological indicators to see how globals at the different growing stages, how the meteorological climate impact to the globals. So these 2 information indicators provide food security early warnings. And also we are focused drought impact to the crops as well. So you can see from different times, for example, in this year in South Africa, who are suffer from El Niño in 2015. So we see how the crop development and they compare with other years, and also to see how the suffer of the crop maize production or lost to the drought. And also for every country, we provide early outlooks. Some countries are favorable, some countries are not unfavorable, and also some countries are mixed. So we need to be more concerned. This analysis of this. So this is the basic introduction of our crop watchers. And also the last component is the bulletins. We are release crop watcher bulletins quarterly and also annually of this. So last few days we are released 2020 annual bulletins and also last quarterly bulletins just 2 days ago. So we are released bulletins, provide information services. Currently, there are more than, these information are used by more than 160 countries. And this significantly enhance the transparency of a global agriculture information, provide independent information service to those countries. And this is we do, but also the same crop watcher can be used by others. As further introduced, we are customized the crop watch for Mozambique. So in the project interfaces, and including down to the district. So the Mozambique can monitor the crops not only for the national, but also province and districts. and also adapt to the global technology in the Mozambique over this, so they can use the list systems to monitor their own individual areas. We provide about 5 round trainings, so that they can capable to use the same system to do the systems, and they incorporate this resource into the national meteorological bulletins and in Portugal and in Portuguese, and information come from the global watchers. They are now using it as a daily routine workers, and this work is supported by the World Bank and the Chinese Science Foundation. And now we are working together to our next steps in order to include more requirement from the Mozambique to customize more needed in order to meet the needed for their own interest of this. And also, as Satu mentioned, Bill Gates Foundation and AGI, Alliance Green Africa, also send individual teams to the Mozambique to give independent evaluations. So this is GloWatch provide easy to learn and operate only after several trainings, so they can able to get in time response from us to support them how to once some problem happens. And they also want to have a more internal capacity to understand the methods and also deep technologies, so they can build their own values for more other users. And for other countries, for example, like
Dr. Wu, I'm going to ask you to wrap up in about a minute.
Yes, I will finish soon. And for the Thailand, they are more advanced, so we are linking them together, so that we feed our information to the Thailand, so they're able to they are obtaining time or their time information from GloWatch to feed up their own system agreement to serve Thailand. So this is another way. And another third way is we hand over system to the Mongolia. So Mongolia National Remote Sensing Center can use this system to do by themselves for this. So there are 3 different implementing ways in the countries. And also because of COVID-19, so we are working for the local Mekong countries to provide trainings to have more countries to involve on that. So overall, GloWatch can provide open and customized platform. So in this case, countries, different countries and stakeholders can develop based on the GloWatch cloud their own monitoring systems. And on the other hand, we are also providing real-time or near real-time agriculture information. So that increase the credibility and the transparency of the information. Currently, UNESCAP, United Nations Commission for Science and Technology for Development, and the World Bank, and also International Fund for Agricultural Development, are promoting global cloud to the developing countries. Currently, there are 20 countries at work on this. We hope we can working together also with UNEP to promoting this to more countries, particularly in the African countries for this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. It's been amazing to see how much that digital technology has progressed just over the last few years, and now it's really very accessible to countries around the world, no matter what their economic state is, just to help manage their own development and process. I'd like to move on to our third panelist. We have Mr. Domingos Zafanias Gove, who is the Director of Food and Agriculture and Natural Resources at the Southern African Development Community Secretariat. While working for the government of Mozambique, he was involved in fisheries management and conservation, as well as integrated protected area planning and management. And within the ministry, he also served as a member of the Mozambique National Science and Technology Council. He is an active member of the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association. So, Mr. Gove, over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much. I will be brief, and I will not make a PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to give priority to the message that I want to share so that we can have further discussions. I want you to bring to the reality of the SADC region before COVID and going through the enabling environment to address food security and climate change at the regional level. As all the African countries, this sub-region is fully part of the CADA process, which is Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, which has 7 commitments. The recommitment to principles and values of CADA, the enhancing of investment in finance for agriculture, ending hunger, which also talks to SDG, reducing poverty, boosting intra-African trade, resilience on climate change, and strengthening mutual accountability. So we are fully part of the CADA and Malabo Declaration commitments as a region. In addition to that, we have what we call the Regional Agriculture Policy, which was approved in 2014. And this regional agriculture has several objectives. One of the objectives is to enhance sustainable production, productivity, and competitiveness. And within that, we are addressing the conservation and sustainable use of plant and animal genetic resources for food and agriculture. We have a center, which is the SADC Plant Genetic Resource Center that is based in Lusaka, Zambia, that is addressing the conservation of plant genetic resources. And very recently, we have agreed to establish a center to address the animal genetic resources in Botswana. The second objective of the regional agriculture policy is to improve regional and international trade and access to markets of agricultural products. The third is to improve private and public sector engagement and investment into the agriculture value chains. The fourth one is reduce social and economic vulnerability in the context of food and nutrition security and the changing economic and climate environment. The fifth one is enhanced development, sustainable development and management of environment. We have what we call the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, which is the guidance for our strategic work throughout a certain specific period of time. In the context of the time frame that we are talking about, which includes 2020, we have been implementing the revised Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan 2015-2020, which has the regional agriculture policy inside it as one of the strategies to address food security and nutrition. In 2017, we approved the Regional Agriculture Investment Plan to operationalize the regional agriculture policy. And in that context, we also have what we call the Food and Nutrition Security Strategy. And we have also the Regional Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan. The context before COVID in terms of food security in our region, and this is being drawn from the 2020 synthesis report on state of food and nutrition security and vulnerability in Southern Africa, was that around 45 million people were food insecure in 2020. And this is 10% increase compared to the previous year in 2019. And the main reason for this is the drought, which has been the worst for the last 40 years, affecting a number of countries in our region. We have acute malnutrition, stunting rates that are high, above 30%, and so forth. When I go to the impacts of COVID in food and nutrition security in our region, and the main impact was due to lockdowns, travel restriction, cross-border restrictions, is that COVID had limited impact in our region in terms of food production as the cropping season 2019-2020 was at the end. But it has impacted heavily on food security because it contributed to poverty, which affected the ability of people to buy food and also the ability of governments to buy and distribute food. For example, we had seen an increase in urban poverty. This is a segment of our society that fully relies entirely on markets to acquire food. Also, there was increase in poverty in rural population because they rely on remittance, they rely on tourism that completely collapsed, they rely also on school feeding programs to secure food for their children. We expect that the food insecurity will even be worse from the lean season that starts now in November up to January because the food stocks in the rural areas will be depleted. The impacts of COVID in our region, as it's happening worldwide, is that the SADC economy of SADC region is projected to contract by 3% in 2020. And these will heavily have impacts on the food and nutrition of our community. The other impact of COVID was the disruption in cross-border transport. And for that, the SADC community, they developed the guidelines for cross-border transport operation across the region during the COVID that was approved by the Council in April 2020, and later was scaled up in collaboration with the East Africa community and COMESA to a wider area to facilitate the movement of goods and services that are really important for agriculture production and consumption. In terms of the way forward to address food security and the agrobiodiversity in context of COVID and climate change, is that we should not reinvent the wheel. We have at international level, the SDG 1, which is ending hunger, and SDG 2, ending poverty, and SDG 2, which is zero hunger. And we are not doing well, even before COVID. At the Pan-African level, we have the CADAP, which is the Malabo Declaration. According to the biennial report on the progress on the implementation of Malabo Declaration that was launched in February 2020, before COVID was a big issue in our region, SADC is not on track. And I can provide more details on this. For example, in relation to commitment number 1, which is a commitment to principles and values of CADAP, only one country, Tanzania, is on track from the 16 countries. The second commitment of the CADAP, enhancing investment finance in agriculture by 10%, no SADC member is on track. The third, ending hunger, no SADC country is on track. The fourth, reduce poverty, no SADC country is on track. The fifth, boosting intra-African trade, only 4 SADC member states are on track out of the 16. The sixth commitment is resilience on climate change. No SADC country is on track. And the seventh commitment is strengthening mutual accountability. Only 2 SADC member states are on track. So we are not doing well. And taking that in recognizing that we should not try to invent anything else when we're talking about COVID and even the climate change. We have to implement the strategies that we have already adopted. In relation to our region, we have the regional agriculture policy, which is CADAP compact. And what we should be implementing is actions to address objective 1, to enhance sustainable production, productivity, and competitiveness. And here I would like to highlight the strengthening of the role of the SADC Plant Genetic Resource Center, which is addressing ex situ work through the regional gene bank that we have in Lusaka, but also through the 15 national gene banks that are scattered through the SADC member states. And also we have the in situ work that we are developing through this center that's addressing community seed banks. I also would like to highlight the establishment of the SADC Animal Genetic Center in Botswana to address livestock genetic resources, and also strengthening the role of the Center for Coordination of Agricultural Research and Development of Southern Africa, CADESA, which is focusing currently on climate smart agriculture because of the situation of the drought in our region that is completely present in all the years. The second aspect is to improve regional and international trade to markets of agricultural products. And here we're addressing aspects that will facilitate the movement of food across the countries, whether they are affected by climate change, as the case of Mozambique with the cyclones and so on, or by drought. And here the aspects that we're addressing aspects related to sanitary and phytosanitary, but also addressing aspects and improving the agriculture information management system. The third objective is to improve private and public sector engagement and investment in agricultural value chains. We have now done a study on the agro-processing value chains where we identified 15 commodities that could be subject to regional value chains. And from there, we prioritize 6. Here is the time to call the private sector to come and invest in these value chains so that we can integrate the region and minimize the food insecurity. In that context, there was the establishment of the SADC Business Forum, which is composed by the Apex Private Sector Association in the 16 member states, that now it's a partner in all the programs that SADC is implementing. And lastly, we have the reduction of social and economic vulnerability in the context of food and nutrition security in changing economic and the climate environment. And here we're strengthening the national vulnerability assessment analysis, which are the basis for us to be able to produce every year the regional vulnerability assessment report with more accurate information, and even adopting methodologies that are implementable during the pandemics, like using virtual methodologies and so forth. The implementation of SADC food and nutrition security strategy through alignment between regional and national, addressing aspects of micronutrients, capacity building, addressing aspects of urban vulnerability and so forth, and also encourage crop diversity through promotion of diversified diets, including indigenous food. And lastly, again, is to enhance sustainable development and management of environment. We are currently reviewing the SADC Regional Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan so that it can be conversant and accommodate the UN SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and the African Union Agenda 2063. And in that context, we are currently finalizing MOUs with UN, UNFCCC, UNCCD, and UNEP so that they can support us in this endeavor. Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure, and it is a pleasure to be part of this discussion. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Domingos. It's really great to hear all the, well, not so good to hear the lack of progress and the challenges that you're facing, but that the commitment really to keep investing and working on action and implementation. I want to turn it over to our final panelists. So we have joining with us Mr. Abid Kalum Soleri. So over to you. You are the head of Pakistan's premier policy research think tank, Sustainable Development Policy Institute, and you're a member of different policymaking forums and advisory boards, including the Prime Minister's National Economic Advisory Council. I look forward to hearing from you about the work that you've been doing in Pakistan. Over to you. You are on mute.
Am I audible now?
Yes, great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And first of all, let me congratulate the organizers for organizing this very timely forum that not only discusses food system transformation, but also the scope for South-South cooperation. What one has learned during previous food systems, that perhaps over-dependency on this global South and global North was one of the factors which impacted the food sovereignty and food security of many of the countries, who then became dependent on the agrochemical and agro corporations. Now, coming to the key questions which are posed here, first, let me give you a slight snapshot of food security situation in Pakistan. We are a country of 220 million people, and the Global Hunger Index report that would be launched today, Pakistan's ranking is 88th out of 107 countries. The conservative estimates are that around 20 to 25% population of Pakistan at some stage of their life over a year, they face the brunt of food insecurity. Mainly the current issue that we are facing, it's not that much of food availability. Pakistan is self-sufficient in its major cereals and major food crops. It's food inflation, access to food, and also the clean drinking water and sanitation, that around 40% of population that is deprived of clean drinking water and sanitation facility. When I looked at our numbers for malnutrition, for infant mortality rate, for stunting, wasting among children, again, our numbers, they are not very impressive compared to South Asia region. We are one of the low performers. Now, within this context, and another thing that is happening in Pakistan, like many other developing countries over the years, that while headcount poverty is decreasing over the years, inequality is still there. So it's not the problem of absolute poverty, while the poverty is decreasing, but inequality among generations and inequality among people and among different geographical region, that is increasing, and that is posing a major challenge to food security system, and that compels us to think of new food system transformation in the new normal that we know is COVID. So after COVID-19, what sort of food system transformation that would suit to all segments of society, to all income level? I think that is the question which our government is trying to address. Now, some of the policy measures that were taken effectively to address the impact of COVID-19 on climate change, for food security, that is our social protection system. So we have one of the highly sophisticated poverty scoring mechanism through a census. Poverty score is done for whole of the country, and then a threshold or an upper threshold is established below which government provides social security. So after COVID, in Pak currency, around 12,000 rupees, which comes to roughly around $80, were provided to 15 million families as one-off payment in the first round of COVID. Today, when I look at the numbers, we still have moderate numbers. The total new cases today are below 3,000. The total new deaths are around 70 deaths. So we have a very moderate wave, but government is providing this social protection to the second wave as well. Now, the challenge that we faced, as I told you, is a food inflation challenge. And in food inflation, it was not disruption of food supply chains. Wheat, which is our staple food, we are almost self-sufficient in it. There was around 10% reduction in the production, but it was almost 80% increase in wheat prices, and that was due to holding and due to smuggling of wheat from Pakistan to Afghanistan and to other Central Asian states where the prices were high. Now, one of the things that the government is doing, we are coming up with the food security dashboard, use of technology whereby all of the districts of Pakistan, and there are around 130 administrative zones or administrative districts in Pakistan, those would be displayed on map, and decision makers, they can see based on commodity, red, yellow or green, the traffic lights. So where the commodity is insufficient commodity to meet the 2 weeks requirement of population of the district, that district would turn green. Where it is less than 2 weeks, it would turn yellow, and where it is almost finished, that district would turn red. And we are getting data collected for wheat, for rice, for sugar, for other essential commodities from a sub-district level on a real-time basis. So use of technology is being utilized to come up with a food security dashboard that would help in a well-informed decision making. Now, when we talk of food security transformation, I think there are a couple of things where we need to transform our existing practices. And the first practice is encouraging local supply chains. We know in the time of COVID, if there is any lockdown, if there is any restriction on mobility or restriction on transportation, this shipment of food commodities from one part of the countries where it is surplus to other part of the countries where it is deficient, it becomes extremely difficult. So that's why now the focus would be on developing local food supply chain. When I look at the opportunities for regional collaboration, so Pakistan, it borders with China, it borders with Afghanistan, with Iran, and with India. Unfortunately, due to political problems and tension with India, the cross-border trade with India on food supply, that is suspended since February 2019. And I think that is affecting the food prices of perishable commodities on both sides of the border. Previously, when there was a shortage of tomatoes or chilies or potatoes or any other product, Pakistan could immediately send its supplies to India, and India could send its supplies to Pakistan, so that the prices they could remain stable. Now with this abandoning of that cross-border trade of food and all sort of trade with India, the perishable commodities, we observe their price spike when there is a reduction in their supplies. China is another potential. CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is one of the flagship project under Belt and Road Initiative. But due to the seasonal variation right now, it's sub-zero on Pak-China border, which is in Himalayan region. So again, the cargo shipment, it gets affected. And that leaves us to Afghanistan and Iran, both of which have their own security problem. Iran is under US sanctions for a long period of time, and Afghanistan, due to security problems, again, Pakistan find itself stuck in a situation where if there is a peace in Afghanistan, Pakistan would be one of the beneficiary for that peace. And of course, Pakistan can then extend its trade up to Central Asia. SAARC, which is South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation for South Asian countries, it's sort of dysfunctional, again, due to Pakistan and India political problems. But there are certain forums within SAARC that I think that needs to be revived. We have SAARC Food Bank, where all SAARC countries, they are mandated to keep a reserve for other SAARC nations, and they can use that food in the time of emergency or crisis. We have SAARC district preparedness centers, and this exchange of data. I think when we talk of South-South cooperation, the most important thing that we need to understand is exchange of data in the context of climate change as well as in the context of food insecurity. So looking at the seasonal variation, looking at the rain or monsoon trends, looking at floods and drought, exchanging that data of river flow, data of precipitation and other, I think that can help the SAARC countries in ensuring food transformation. Similarly, another area where we see a lot of potential for cooperation is locust control. So we know that locust, it migrates from East Africa to over Yemen and Afghanistan or Iran and enters in Pakistan. And then from Pakistan, it goes to India. Now, locust control, if it gets controlled in Iran or in Yemen, that is in the benefit of Pakistan. And if it gets controlled in Pakistan, that is in the benefit of India. If it gets controlled in India, that is in the benefit of Nepal. So this year, locust went as far as to the areas bordering Nepal, Iran, India-Nepal border. So again, in case of food security, we need to foresee that where locust lays its eggs due to changing climate, for last 2 years, it has started laying eggs in the deserts of Pakistan because it finds vegetation and greenery in the autumn months. And so instead of going back to Africa, it lays eggs in Pakistan. And in the summer, we receive then 2 flocks, one from Africa and the second, which is indigenous flock from Pakistan. So it is important, again, to control such this climate change direct impact as well as the climate-induced pest and food insecurity through regional cooperation. In the food transformation system, the last point that I want to say, and then I'll stop, that is the potential of cooperation for Pakistan with China, and then that cooperation can be extended to Afghanistan, to Iran, to Central Asia. We need to be part of the Chinese food supply chains. And China and Pakistan, they are already collaborating on agriculture. It's for the first time that China has appointed one of agriculture consular in Pakistan, Chinese embassy to Islamabad, to Pakistan. And that signifies that China is giving importance to cooperation in agriculture. Unfortunately, due to language barriers, due to many other barriers, Pakistan could never be part of Chinese food supply chain, but now there is a very strong focus that if we become part of that supply chain, Pakistan can be a bridge for a gateway for China, Chinese agriculture supplies to be exported to India and onwards in the rest of the South Asia and through Afghanistan to Central Asia and to Iran as well. So there are the venues for South-South cooperation. All we need to do is to share our experiences, what is working in our countries, what is not working in the similar socioeconomic countries. And not only in South Asia, we also need to learn from Africa, which is home of agrobiodiversity, which is home of all the indigenous practices. What is working in different countries of Africa that we can learn, and we can also share experiences what is not working or working in South Asia or East Asia or West Asia, so that southern countries, they can have a knowledge-based food system transformation rather than going for green revolution that was led by agrochemical corporations, and that now we are accusing and blaming as one of the factors that is leading to carbon emission in our agriculture sector. I'll stop here and I'll be happy to take questions or feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Abid. I know that we're a little bit over, but Kerstin, if it's possible, I would like to take a few minutes to ask a couple of questions. First, there's been a very interesting exchange between Fidel and Mark Vegeriff. And so if I can kind of just bring that into a discussion from you, Fidel, about, I was really pleased to hear you earlier and yesterday around your support for agrobiodiversity, but Mark brought up this report that was published earlier this year, And so I was wondering if you can expand a bit more on both your comments and Agra's role in promoting agrobiodiversity. On the other hand, how that balances out with the, let's say you call it the final choice of African farmers and governments about how they want to utilize support, but also the role Agra plays in providing advice as well to countries on the trade-offs, the benefits of promoting agroecology versus reliance on a couple of staple crops.
Thank you, Patty. Now, I'm afraid we'll not have time to deal with all of that, but let me just make a few statements. And I think just to use the context of the spirit of the discussion, where there's an aspiration to build back better, my starting point is it has some almost like moral repertoire. You cannot go into a conversation with a fundamentalist view of you know what the answer is. So my general statement is to shift to the food system we are talking about, you require a shared vision of what is success. What does it mean? How do we achieve the triple P I referred to earlier? The answer to the question should be specific. I made a statement, I don't believe in blueprints. I don't believe in copying from India and pasting in Mali. I believe in learning from the lesson of India and allowing the Malian farmers to adapt it to their own circumstances. So the answer is each society should find their own pathway to a global challenge. The third element of my answer is if we want to move together as a community, we should have shared vision, values, and concrete modality of working together and holding each other accountable. What is at stake here is a shift from a mindset of obligation of resources, my approach, my organization, how good I am, therefore more resources for me. The shift we need to do is an obligation of result. What is success? For it to happen, what are the key ingredients of our conversation? And thirdly, what are the concrete modalities of our conversation? So, of accountability. The discussion with Mark is very interesting. What I can say is two things. Mark is making reference to a report that was written by somebody. It's the view of somebody, but we all know the map is not the territory. If you want to have a balanced conversation, you should ask people to tell you what were their intent, what they have done, what have worked, what didn't work, and how do we intend to move forward. My view as a son of an African farmer, it's not an ideology. I saw my mother plant according to principle of agroecology. I'm not opposing agroecology to something else. Farming essentially is an art of locality, is allowing African farmers, based on their own objective, their resources, their circumstances, to make the choices that enable them to win. The role of Agra, of Mark, of everybody else is to support that process. So that's the generic answer I can give you now. I mean, if you want to know what Agra is doing, listen to our story. Don't have a third party tell you what they think, because I think we will not get to where we want to go now. Yesterday, I had the privilege of facilitating a session where Dr. Kumar from India provided an amazing story around empowering smallholder farmers, around using local know-how and technology, creating diversity. Diversity is not a given. It's an outcome of a process, of a way of engaging with resources, with the main means of beneficiating in order to produce in the long run. So that equation, I invite Mark to open discussion, not referring to somebody else's report. If the United Nations can witness a proper conversation around what works where, under what condition, I think we'll be totally willing to participate to that. Totally open to the discussion. We are learning from everywhere, from China, from Brazil, across African countries. I don't understand why anybody, for whatever reason, will close their eyes on something that is working. So, good question. And where I come from, the question is more important than the answer. That's all. Over.
Thank you, Fidel. I have a second question for Bing Fang. In your work, I was wondering whether well, I guess a two-part question. One is that the amount of data that you're able to, your program's able to synthesize, are there any challenges or concerns around ownership of data, sources of data, data protection? Given that this is kind of you're basically providing a service for globally for a number of countries. And then second, given the theme around not just around food security, but around climate change, how if you're able to also monitor through your system the types of crops, the kind of production methods, and links to agrobiodiversity, and looking at those impacts and make those comparisons to help contribute to also the climate change mitigation and resilience discussions.
Thank you for your questions. For the first one, is two aspects. From our point of view, we are providing the tools on the Alibaba. So data is not ours. For example, we are collecting data from all the other sources, from satellite data from Landsat or Chinese satellite data, and also from European satellite data, and we are processed in the Alibaba cloud. Then we delete it. We are only keep the indicators on the databases. But the original data we don't keep it because it's too big to be stored on our systems. So we delete it, and these information indicators are shared to over the world, all users of this. But for the countries, like Mozambique, if he want to use the tools, the methodology, they can do the same as we do. They collect the data from all the sources and put into the CloverWatch cloud and process. They can delete it. But the indicators, or they can leave it in the systems, but they also can delete it as he wants after analysis. So it's not a problem. And for the CloverWatch monitoring, we are not touch high resolutions. We are using mostly middle or low resolution satellite data, like 10 meters, 30 meters, or 1 kilometer. So it's free available, free of charge. All data are available. You can download from everywhere. But what we do, additional value to this, is we generate the indicators, information from existing data, and and put them together, have a overview of all these informations. And for the second, for your second questions, in the systems we are using prediction informations from for example from Chinese meteorological administrations. In the early stage of the growing season, they have a 3 months or 6 months prediction. Then we are using those informations to predict global production, global yield in next 3 months or 6 months of this. And this is for short-term or mid-term prediction for global food productions. So that's why in the first bulletin of the year, we have an whole year food production estimation, forecasting. This is because we are using these information. But for climate change information, we are doing case by case, but not in the operational, in the CloverWatch or CloverWatch monitoring systems, because CloverWatch monitoring is for the near-time or short-term forecasting and monitoring, not for climate change risk assessment or adaptations. But by using information, particularly for over 10 years or 20 years information generated from CloverWatch, then we can analyze the climate change impact, particularly how human activities to mitigate the impact of climate change. For example, we have developed methodology to assess the mitigations of human interventions to the drought impact for this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, not able to ask questions to all the panelists as we're running over time. I know we have to head into a short break right now. I'll hand it back to Kerstin.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for an extremely well moderated session with really, really interesting discussions, as we well knew they would be. We will break for 10 minutes. We will be back in 10 minutes, and then we will start our final panel discussion of this forum. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to Patty. It's been a pleasure. We will reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Hi.
I think we are slowly getting back. I can see that we are.
Hello, our facilitator is here.
Yes, I can see that our facilitator is here. So we are in good hands. We are ready to start.
We are in good hands.
Good. And you can hear me. I just want to make sure my mic and things are working.
Yes, works
Yes.
perfectly.
Okay. And the light is okay.
Yes.
Very good.
Thanks. Oh.
Very good. So we will start. Welcome back, everyone. And we move to the last panel session of our forum. And we are joined for this session by a colleague of ours, and our moderator is Mr. William Speller from UNEP, who is from the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity Office at UNEP, TEEB for short. I'm sure many of you are very recognize the acronym. And William works on natural capital accounting and valuation of ecosystem services and the implementation of the TEEB for agriculture and food projects. By training, he's a development and agricultural economist with a decade of experience in public policy, advising governments on national development and agricultural strategies and environmental policy frameworks. Before he joined UNEP, he worked at the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, the World Bank Group, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and the Bank of England. Will holds a Bachelor of Economics from the University of Melbourne, a Master of Science in Economics from the Stockholm School of Economics, and a Master of Science in Environmental Management from University of London. From all of this, we can deduce that we are in excellent hands. So, Will, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kerstin and Lindsay and team for the excellent event that you've organized so far. It's my pleasure to facilitate this last session. Of course, I'm biased, but I believe we're saving the best for last. So stay tuned for exciting lineup of speakers. We have speakers here from a wide mix of academia, policy institutes, government, from across the globe, South Africa, India, Bhutan, and Patty, who of course based in the Netherlands, but a wide global experience. Unfortunately, Paulo Nunes from the FAO was unable to join us today, but I believe his presentation will be nevertheless put online after the event. So we have four panelists. We have about an hour. I'd ask the panelists to try to keep to 10 minutes. And so we can have 20 minutes for discussion. And please, attendees, continue to put your questions in the question and answer box as we go through. So I'd like to pass the floor first to Mark Vergerev, who is a lecturer of development studies at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. His research focuses on agrarian transformation and food systems, so very much the focus of what we're discussing these 3 days. He has over 30 years experience in the development sector, from project level to working at national and international policy and advocacy. So with that, Mark, you're very much welcome, and looking forward to hearing your remarks. Over to you.
Hi, morning. It's still morning here where I am in Johannesburg, and thanks for having me on this panel and in this event. So I've been sitting in this morning and I managed to listen to some of the discussions over the last days as well. I couldn't follow all of them, I'm afraid. And we're focusing on food system transformation. One of the things I've found missing in some of the discussion so far, or hopefully where I can add value, is really centering the issue of power and the analysis of power and changing power within the food system. We can all talk about what we would like it to be. I mean, Satu this morning gave the nice diagrams of a holistic view of a food system. But what's driving what happens is very much linked to power. And what we're seeing in the food system globally is a rapid concentration of power and control, sometimes over land itself, but very much also over the agri-food system as a whole. And this is a concentration of power in corporate hands often. It's often driven by the imperatives of financialization, where decision-making is being made very much based on the returns on investment returns to shareholders. So decision-making in this sort of concentrated food system is increasingly removed from the farm. It's removed from the specificity of the piece of land, the farmer, the workers. If we continue in this trend, it's likely we're going to be seeing increasingly agriculture without farmers and without farms. Land just becomes a site of production. There was recently released just last week reports from the International Land Coalition under the project called Uneven Ground, you can find online. And there's a number of reports on this and different dimensions of land inequality there. Just to give an example of what I'm talking about, when Kentucky Fried Chicken, I think we all know it, it's got more than 20,000 stores in over 125 countries. And if, that seems quite big to me, but it's not big enough. Kentucky Fried Chicken is actually owned by Yum Brands. So it's not just a company on its own, it falls under a bigger umbrella of Yum Brands that also own Pizza Hut and Taco Bell and others. So this is an enormous corporation with influence around the world. When Kentucky Fried Chicken opened their first stores in Tanzania, of course, the franchise held by a South African-owned company registered in Kenya, they wanted to import absolutely everything into the country, from the branding and advertising and packaging down to the coleslaw and the bread rolls, and of course the chicken. The Tanzanian government refused to let them import chicken. So they had to go into an agreement with a Tanzanian chicken producer. Of course, they didn't go to small-scale chicken producers. They went to the largest company they could find in the sector. I've met with them and interviewed them. If they'd been allowed to, they would have imported chicken from Rainbow Chickens in South Africa. Rainbow Chickens, the biggest chicken producer on the continent, owned in turn by Remgro Limited, owned primarily by Johan Rupert, one of the 3 richest men in South Africa and a billionaire globally in dollar terms. So that is the system they would have reinforced if they were given the choice in this case. But anyway, at least some level of regulation meant they had to actually spend some of their money in Tanzania. Everything else is imported, chips frozen from the Netherlands, coleslaw and rolls from South Africa, and so on. So of course, one can see how limited their contribution to the Tanzanian economy would be. And of course, every store manager also an expatriate brought in. So they're selling a particular kind of food, which I think most of us would agree is very unhealthy, and a particular agricultural model. Of course, to the extent they're successful, they're displacing many local food sellers, many of them women, who would be buying all of their ingredients locally. And we're seeing the same kind of thing happening. Maybe that's an extreme example, but the same kind of thing happens in what's imported by supermarket groups and so on as they expand, the kind of supply chains that they support and build on, and the ones that then they undermine, because of course, then if KFC replaces some of that market, that means less market for Tanzanian farmers growing produce that would go into cooked food and so on. So this is happening around the world. And I think we have to look at it. This is a South-South cooperation forum. So I think we have to also give particular attention to what this means for the global South. And of course, all of these big corporations still tend to be based in the metropoles of the rich nations. So the profit accumulation is not happening in southern countries. The new technology that is being pushed in food production, processing, and so on, that is often job displacing. And it's also owned elsewhere, not in countries of Africa, not in most of the countries of Asia. So you have to think, what does that mean then for power in our food systems and control? I think food system thinking these days is arguing that we need a holistic approach. We must take into account history, the particular ecology. We must take into account the political context, the social context. And so it's entirely relevant to look at our particular context that we're in African cities, for example. And the colonial history is part of that. And what we are seeing continued and perpetuated in food systems is also very much building on that colonial system. We shouldn't forget that. And we need to therefore be conscious of that. And often that means we need to be deconstructing that so that we can build something different that works in our context. And that context is rapid urbanization. It's still a high dependence of people on agriculture and related industries and so on. So we can really not, and it's a context where there aren't other industries creating new and quality jobs. So we really cannot afford to lose jobs in agriculture. The consensus these days on food systems is that it's not only about delivery of food, it is also about creating more equitable economy and jobs. But this is even more important to recognize in the context of most African cities where there's such high levels of unemployment and there aren't other opportunities. And I wanted to mention women in this food system. In this globalized food system, it is striking that it is some of the richest men in the world who sit at the top of most of these corporations. And it is women who fill the most vulnerable and lowest paid positions. So whether it's working in the supermarket as a cashier or it's working as a farm worker on a farm, it is women who are in the lowest paid and most vulnerable jobs and have the least negotiating power. And coming to COVID, we've seen this playing out in terms of the impacts of COVID. An in-depth study called NIDS-CRAM in South Africa, that's a longitudinal panel study, found that in the first 3 months of our lockdown situation in South Africa, about 3 million people lost their jobs, which already is highly problematic. The striking thing for me was that 2 of those 3 million were women. And this was because of the vulnerable position women are in jobs and employment. So that is part of what we have to address, and we have to address these power dynamics, the patriarchal power dynamics, the power that is accumulating in the hands of a few large corporations, and the logic that is driving their decision making, which is one that is not linked to local biodiversity, local land, local needs, local workers, and so on. But this is the last session of these 3 days, so let's try and look a little bit at solutions. And I think what we need to be looking at, of course, is pathways to a more equitable and regenerative food system. One is a regenerative of our societies, of our ecology. Regenerative, not just sustainable, because we need to restore soils. We need to restore communities that have been denuded of their wealth and of their cohesion. So we need a regenerative food system, not going back to something that was there, but moving forward to what we need to see happening. I think agroecology needs to be part of that. I'm not arguing exclusively, but I'm interested in not just because of the environmental benefits, but because it helps farmers build autonomy from an increasingly corporate controlled food system. And I think building that autonomy for different food systems that can be more locally controlled and more democratically controlled in the hands of many more owners, multitudes of owners rather than a few corporate owners, is central to what we need to do. I think in doing that, we need to build on the many, what often is called informal traders, but I think they're not always informal. Our market traders, our street traders, our small shops and so on. That is where many people are finding jobs and incomes, but also ownership. It's a broad ownership that is important as much as jobs. Linking up the smaller scale farmers with those street traders and shops and so on is one of the ways that we build a different food system with a more circular economy and keeping more wealth within our countries and within our communities. But I don't want to fall into this local trap. It's not as simple as only being local. Some of the food needs to move long distances. And what becomes important then is the nature of the networks of in the flows of food. It's who owns what, who are the winners and losers, as much as whether it's over a particular distance or not. We see in most of our countries, you cannot feed a city just from the immediate surrounds. So let us not fall into a simplistic localism, but let us look at the nature of the food system and who is winning, who is losing, and who's controlling that. And with COVID, we need to know more about the impacts. We are part of a 3-country, Tanzania, Ghana, and South Africa study that is looking at the political economy of the impacts of COVID on food systems. We need more such research, and I hope that we'll have more findings that we'll share over that in the coming years. The concerns would be, what is the lock-in? We see changes, but what is the lock-in and who is winning and losing in that? And where are women winning and losing in that? But the solutions to me lie in building on what small farmers, traders, and so on are already doing, valuing that rather than dismissing it, which often happens, and enabling that building of a different food system from the ground with more equitable control, with women playing a more central role. I do think in that we need strong women's organizations as well. We need feminist organizations because that is essential to pushing a transformation that will put women at the center. Thank you.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. Those are very interesting messages about the power structures in agri-food systems and the winners and losers. And I think, what occurred to me while you were speaking is that, it was sort of 2008-9 when we had this food price spike, and that kind of brought a sort of sudden resurgence of interest in foreign investors in agriculture, and the kind of land grabbing trend. And it's important to think that's now sort of 13 years ago, and has all the work that we've done on responsible agricultural investment, what impact has that had, and are we on the right track now? So, I mean, I think I'd come back to you after in the Q&A to get some of your observations on that. But thanks again, Mark. And for now, I'd like to pass the floor to Professor Jyoti Tamang. So Professor Jyoti is the senior professor in the Department of Microbiology at Sikkim Central University in India. He's a food microbiologist and has worked in ethnic fermented foods and beverages in the Himalayas for at least 34 years, focusing on food safety and health benefits. He's also currently holding the chair of the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. So with that, Professor Tamang, it's over to you, and if you'd like to provide your remarks.
Thank you very much. Would you like to, I have sent my presentations. Would you like to share, or should I share?
If you can share from your side, I think that would be ideal.
Okay, just wait.
I think if you could just, if you can click the presentation so we can maximize the screen.
Yeah, just wait, I'm just trying to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Namaskar. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important discussions. I will be focusing mostly on the Hindu Kush Himalayan regions. So there are 8 countries in this Hindu Kush Himalayas. The first is as per the themes given to us, what appropriate policy responses measures have been in place to effectively address the impact of the COVID-19 and the climate change on the vulnerable groups. As far as the Hindu Kush Himalayan regions is concerned, the 8 countries, the ICIMOD, International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, has already released a policy document on the COVID-19 impact and policy responses in the Hindu Kush Himalaya. That was released in June. This is the website. So it says that the mountain-specific actions are needed. These are the gist of the recommendations. Support for the farmers to continue producing and marketing food and to establish food reserves to meet emergency needs will help prevent hunger and food insecurity. Small business and the informal sector need to be prevented from collapse. The post-COVID-19 need to review for more sustainable livelihoods and the resilience, quick efforts to conserve and restore water resources and the natural spring recharge areas, both of farming and for household use. Important now when hand washing and hygiene are key concerns, because water is very important in the Himalayan areas. The preservation of water, and there are certain water bodies because of the Himalayas, the glaciers and all. And the women play a very important role. That is, the women's organization network in mountain communities will be essential for the short-term response and for the long-term involvement decision making. I'm just going to the gist of that. The number 2 is the theme, what measures can be instituted to promote food systems transformation as a coping strategy against the COVID-19 and climate change? The ICIMOD in the policy document says the short-term policy, short-term and the medium to the long. In the short-term, increased food procurement and the storage capacity in the mountains for the durable food storage and the far-reaching distribution systems. Provide more subsidies to the poor people for purchasing food and the buying the agriculture inputs. Of course, this is a policy decisions of the respective countries, the federal governments and the state government in the countries. Promote collection centers set up by the smallholder farmers, cooperatives, which can help with the buffer to keep supply chains functioning even during market closures. Now, the long term to the medium to the long term, the recommendation is develop a specific program on the revival of mountain native livestock and the neglected, underutilized crops and the other native products. There are many bioresources, as you know, that the Himalayan is known for the bioresources, and there are mountain-specific the animals, domesticated animals, and there are many wild edible plants and the fruits which are very specific to the Himalayas. The transition to the organic farming is very important, as I would like to tell the audience that Sikkim, one of the states in India, is the first state in India to declare as an organic farming. So my state where I'm coming from is totally an organic farming state. Invest in research and the development for technology advancement on the cultivations, post-harvest, value additions, and the marketing of mountain native products. Invest in ICT is very important, use of the technology and the technology to facilitate linkage between the mountain farmer producers group and the other markets. And the last one is the FAO says the transformation of agriculture and the food systems is essential in delivering safe, affordable, and sustainable diets. Now, this is not mentioned in the policy. This is my hypothesis, my observations, which I'm presenting to you. It should be the daily variable, affordable, sustainable diets are the cultural and the ethnic foods. Every community in this world has a cultural food, the ethnic food. I think in this pandemic, these foods, the importance of these foods should be highlighted. There are more than 5,000 varieties of the major and the minor fermented foods in the world, and Africa is rich in the diverse types of fermented foods and the beverages and all, and which are used as a staple, curry, side dish, fried, paste, and so on. In Himalayan Hindu Kush only, there are 1,000 region-specific ethnic fermented foods and the alcoholic beverages, more than 3,000 ethnic non-fermented foods. So this is the Hindu Kush Himalayan regions. There are 8 countries and all. So on the basis of the gastronomy, the food cultures, the eastern part is mostly the staple food is the rice, followed by or maize, or the finger millets in the higher mountain areas, barley, and the soybean is very important in the eastern part, both fermented and non-fermented, and the milk products, which are produced from the mostly in the mountain areas, cow, and the higher altitude yak, and in the lower areas, buffalo, and alcoholic drink, of course. And in the Western Himalayas, including the western part of India, the western Nepal, the western part of China, the Pakistan and Afghanistan, it is not the rice, it's a wheat-based, like naan, diets, and several milk and the milk products and all, and of course the meat products also. So this is the typical Himalayan dish. Rice is the staple food, followed by both fermented and non-fermented agriculture, and this is a traditional drink in the Himalayas. And there are varieties of the milk the products in the Himalayas, which are prepared. And what I want to focus is that, as you know, that the probiotics, as everybody knows what is probiotic and all. So probiotic, Yakult company has already promoting or marketing the Yakult, and even in the Europe also, and America, and then Africa, everywhere. Now in the supermarket, we get the probiotics and all. But the probiotics products are also found culturally, traditionally prepared in the Himalayas. These are the traditional prepared. These are not marketed. These are prepared at home. And we did the studies and all. And we found that these products also have a probiotics and all. And they protect against the diarrhea, the reduction of serum cholesterol, colon cancers, lactose intolerance, and they stimulate immune systems. And there's still the research is going on. There are some findings that these products, which are culturally, traditionally produced in every household in the Himalayan regions, have the probiotic the properties and all. I think these products are very, very essential in the pandemic stage now. What we need is to that we have to tell the people they know how to prepare this traditional milk product, but they do not know the scientific mechanisms, the health properties of this. I think we have to do. And I also expect the same in the African fermented milk product and the African food also. Several researches have been done and all. The publications are there. I think the organizations, the UNDP or the other organizations should focus on this and tell the people that your foods are very important at least this the pandemic, and I think that will solve the third theme, the transport systems, the food transport systems, transportation of this food as a diet. And beside that, there are so many soybeans products in the Himalayas and all these are the things. And as you know, the plant, the soybean is it contains the highest plant protein food. It's a low cost, high plant protein food. And these are the fermented products in the Himalayas, like kinema, kawaja, and so many the vernacular names and all. And in China, in the southern China, it's called the daochi. In Myanmar, it's called pibok, and kinema also in Bhutan. Then other products, soya sauce, daochi of China, supu of China, and all. So what we have done is that I just want to say that we have done the whole genome sequence, and what we found is that the red color is the immunity protein. So the protein present in the fermented soybean food helps to push the immunity, which is very, very important in this pandemic and all. So we believe the people in the Himalayas who are consuming the traditional foods may have, I do not know the clinical data of that, but at least we believe that these foods are very, very important to boost immunity and to reduce to give them more confidence of their food. And I think these are all the very healthy food, have a functionalities. And I believe that similar types of food, which is called dawa dawa, iru, sambala in Africa, that is not the fermented soybean, but it's a fermented wild legumes and all. I think if we do some research, we will find out that they also may have the immunity protein in that product. And this is one very new the model which we have designed using the bioinformatics and the omics and metagenomics, and it realizes that the microorganisms present in the traditional foods have got their several functionalities, several, the disease profiling and how to combat diseases, vitamins, amino acids, so many things are. I think this data is very important if we apply in every ethnic foods and all. And the fermented soybean food, the kinema, has got so many properties and all. I told you that it contains all amino acids. It's very rich in the linoleic acid, the phytosterols, vitamins, and antioxidants, and so on and on. So this is just the picture of it is a functional food, cultural food, low cost, and health benefits at this pandemic and all. And besides that, there are so many the gluten-free or the fermented cereal foods also in the Himalayas and all. If you see in the Afghanistan, Kashmir in India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, there are several types of breads. and some of them are the gluten-free also. The traditional foods, I think these are also very important as a diet in as a food in the local diet. So one very important cereal is the finger millet, which is commonly called kodo, and it is a gluten-free. So it is very popular in Nepal, in India, and even in Bhutan. It is called the dhero. It's a staple food, and it is made as a rice. And we are doing the work on this also. It contains a very high calciums and even some, it is a completely gluten-free and all. If the same
Professor, could I ask you to start to bring it to a close? Thank you.
So the beverage, and it contains the vitamin B, amino acid, and high caloric and all. So the food has got several the health promoting benefits, and these are all the literature. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to cut you short there, just leaving some time for questions. So very interesting observations there, in particular about, if we think about food system transformation, we need to also bear in mind the health impacts of whatever we are doing, and also the cultural and ethnic dimensions of food systems. And I also realized one significant downside of virtual meetings, because when you put all those pictures up, my taste buds started to get excited, and I wish we could be there to share some of these dishes with you, but hopefully another time. So thank you once again, Professor, for your remarks. Our next speaker is Tayan Rajgarung. He's a specialist and advisor within the Department of Agriculture in the Ministry of Agriculture and Forests of Bhutan. He's also worked in the National Soil Center of Bhutan, and his research is in natural resources management. So over to you, Tayan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Williams. And thank you to all the organizing institutions, particularly ECMOT, for getting me on this very interesting webinar series. It has been quite a learning for last 2 days, and it's good to be in the last session of this very interesting presentation. So what I will be bringing in is something that we in Bhutan, particularly, okay, can you see my, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I'll be basically talking within the frame of the terms of reference that the organizing committee had given, and focusing on theme 3 of food systems transformation, particularly in case of Bhutan, amidst this COVID-19. So so I'll not try to take any time on this. There were 3 questions set to us about the policies, the measures that we have undertaken, the opportunities that we have, and also the possible South-South cooperation for the future, the way forward. So I'll basically focus my presentation on this. I'm sure I'll be very, very brief. So in Bhutanese case, the appropriate policy response measures, I think, as was explained by everyone, earlier panelists, yesterday's and the earlier day, I think the COVID-19 really did expose the fragility of the food systems that we have, both within a country, regional, and also global. I think it really shows that our food system is really fragile. Things could really collapse and things could really go bad. In Bhutanese case, because we are a landlocked country, I think the situation is much more worse than the countries who have access to water bodies or the water transport systems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain you the policy response interventions that the government of Bhutan did when the COVID pandemic was declared. Basically in 3 major front, not limiting to this, there are so many other minor ones. The first being social protection policies. The reason I'm explaining this is one of the major sector Bhutan has or depends on is tourism. Now, as soon as the COVID-19 pandemic was declared, we got everything blocked, and the tourism sector was the most biggest hit sector. And we found a lot of people, hoteliers, travel agents, and people working in the sector got laid off from the employment. So the government spent a lot of time and resources to actually compensate these laid off employees and also re-engage them in a different activities and sectors. The other one is food security reserves. I think this was another very strong social protection policies that had to come in to ensure that people don't go without food. The third under the social protection was policy of the food price management, not to really regulate that it doesn't go beyond the control of the consumer. The second policy, major policy area where the intervention was seen was governance policy, particularly the travel restrictions and quarantine requirements, which almost every country did. The regulated agriculture supply chain, here we were very particular in regulating the import as well as the export, that we did follow all the protocols of COVID, even on any goods that went out of Bhutan or that came into Bhutan. Once it was inside, the government also initiated a policy on facilitating the domestic trade of the agriculture products to ensure that the supply chains don't get really disrupted or are dead. The most important and the biggest major intervention was the economic contingency plan, which was followed by most of the countries to particularly build and enhance the resilience, economic security, and self-sufficiency. In Bhutanese case, we really looked at only three particular sectors: tourism sector, then the construction sector, where the labor force was a major issue. Then most important sector was the agriculture and livestock production. To explain you a bit, some of the interventions within this agriculture and livestock sector were prioritization of commodities to produce, because Bhutan is basically import dependent in terms of food. So we had to really start producing foods that we don't get because of the COVID restrictions. Budgetary support to local government to production marketing, enhancing the marketing systems, facilitating the local government agencies by the central programs or central agencies, commercial production by state-owned enterprises, and finally to improve the access and the communications. Now, looking at all this that's happened over the last 8-9 months, the opportunities and measures that we see, I think basically it could be put together into two major areas of resilience and food sovereignty, which again, in fact, echoes the same idea that was presented yesterday and also in the day one, that a lot of panelists talked about this resilience and the food sovereignty. So basically, even in Bhutanese case, we found that these are the two major opportunities that COVID really gave us to look at how resilient we could make our food system, and also to see the opportunity for food sovereignty. The measures that we could do within these two broad areas in resilience, for example, is to integrate food system to natural resource regime at the landscape level. Again, going back to the natural resource that we have and build on the food system within the resource system, and not to overexploit the natural resource. Then one area I think that we need to now initiate is an access approach of, for instance, ideas like food, water, energy nexus, poverty environment, technology, value chain poverty, to really food system transformation, to work from this nexus approach. Third, being enhancing efficiency of food supply chain. What we realized is, as soon as the trade and movements were restricted, we found that most of our food system had to operate or are of a food supply chains. Now, empowering the producers, which was again explained by earlier panelists, to take advantage of evolving agriculture value chain, I think is the measures that we have to take now. Linking both, as Mark said, we don't want to romanticize the food supply chains, but rather work on linking both the long and the short supply chains, and have a national, regional, and global food supply systems or supply chains. And finally, within the resilience is empowering the farmers producer group. Again, this idea was also shared by the panelists. Within the food sovereignty, as was presented yesterday by panelists from Philippines, I think a revival of local dietary and food systems here in Bhutanese case, because we are in the Himalayas, so the non-timber forest products are widely used within the food system. So probably to look at this and to revive them into the food system is important now, and to look at from a regenerative food supply systems or food system for safe, healthy, and ecologically sustainable production systems, community-based food reserve systems, circular economy, vis-a-vis the green economy, particularly for a case like Bhutan, where we talk a lot about green economy, carbon neutrality. I think this is going to work. And finally, I think for small systems like ours, food branding, I think has to come now, and this is a measure that we can do. Now, finally, for the next step of South-South cooperation, if I may share my idea, is I think having seen the success of many of the countries where food systems are really operating within this crisis system, I think the South-South, the South countries in the South, I think we could collaborate together to document which practices actually survived within this crisis system. The second being innovation and amplification of food supply chains, its role actually in the regional and international food system. Can we amplify it? Integrating the food system in natural resource management nexus, particularly from the environmental consequences that we are seeing due to the consumption pattern, over exploiting the natural resources in growing particular food or food types in a country system without considering the carrying capacity of the landscape. The fourth one, again, an idea which was really promoted last year by IFRI through their 2019 report of rural revitalization. I think this is where the food system could really come out through modernization, social protection, access to services, support to micro and small medium enterprises, private sector engagement, inclusive development, circular economy, and most importantly, I think, is the digital solution which has to come very strongly to revitalize the rural sector. Enhancing the investment on resilient and sustainable food system. And finally, I think the South-South cooperation could actually have a forum on food systems to forward collective investigation and solution to promote food system transformation. I think with this, I will stop here. Thank you very much, Mr. Willem. I end here.
Thank you very much, Tyann. Very, very interesting to see and to hear about the kind of challenges and response that COVID has placed on the food system in Bhutan, and some very interesting observations about social protection measures, maintenance of supply chains, resilience and food sovereignty, the community-based food reserve systems, food branding, and consumption patterns. So all very interesting observations, and thank you very much. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, our final speaker on this panel is Patty Fong. Patty, we've already been introduced to, so I will spare the lengthy introduction. So welcome again, Patty, and look forward to your remarks. And just a reminder, we'll have a little bit of time for question and answer after Patty has spoken, so continue to put your questions in the Q&A function. Welcome, Patty, and over to you.
Thank you, Will. I'm just going to take a second to share my screen. Oops, sorry. I'm doing the same mistake as from my panel. Let me stop share and move my slides.
There we go.
Is that okay?
Yep, that's great.
Okay, great. So Kerstin gave an introduction to the Global Alliance a little bit earlier. As she said, we're a strategic alliance of 28 foundations, and our work is guided by a series of 7 shared principles which shape our vision of the future of food, express our values, and encompass the change we want to make. These principles include renewability, resilience, equity, diversity, healthfulness, inclusion, and interconnectedness. Talk about minutes really is confirmed by many of the presentations that have been made today, and that what COVID-19 has highlighted is that it highlights the fragility of our food systems and the deep interconnections that exist between human, animal, and planetary health. It has amplified the stark realities of food access for the most vulnerable, especially women and smallholder farmers and the landless farm workers. It's important to put COVID in the context of 3 interlinked health crises that result from food systems not being fit for purpose. First, we're experiencing a human health crisis. A double burden of malnutrition and overconsumption is taking place in the same communities and increasingly in many low and middle income countries. In addition to rising food insecurity, human health is also impacted by occupational hazards, environmental contamination, antimicrobial resistance, and contaminated, unsafe, and altered foods. Second, we are in the midst of an ecological health crisis. Food systems are responsible for almost 60% of global biodiversity loss and represent between 21 and 37% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Land use change and deforestation are primarily caused by the expansion of food production into previously untouched ecosystems, especially for livestock production. It's the single biggest environmental driver of new disease outbreaks by exposing humans and domestic animals to wildlife and the diseases they carry. And COVID-19 is only the latest in an increasing emergence of these zoonotic diseases. Third, we have an animal health crisis. 60% of all mammals on Earth, 70 billion animals, are farmed for food worldwide every year. The majority is produced under intensive livestock production systems with poor animal welfare standards. These systems drive the increased use of antibiotics and are also connected to the emergence of zoonotic diseases. All the efforts we see today to address these symptoms will not do much to stop the decline and build resilience unless we change the narrative. That is, the mindsets, the assumptions, and structures that define our systems. And this refers back to what Mark said in his earlier presentation about power really being central to this. So by changing the goals of the system, we change the system. And then this will then drive the new policies, practices, investments, and business models. There is a common rallying call to build back better, but building back better isn't enough. We must tackle the root causes of our health crises by addressing human health and planetary health together. It's time to counter a pervasive and powerful narrative which dominates our global food systems. This narrative shapes how our food is produced, harvested, processed, distributed, marketed, eaten, and disposed of. It drives and dominates research, investments, policy priorities, and practices of actors across the agri-food sector, from governments and research establishments to investors and businesses. This prevailing narrative focuses on the quantity of food and calories produced. It's based on the assumption that we need to maximize yields by doubling food production by 2050. And this narrow focus has come at the expense of other goals like health and ecological integrity. As a result, it has led to today's predominantly industrialized food system. Through this process, we identified key differences underpinning the assumptions of the prevailing narrative through a health-focused, the assumptions of the prevailing narrative versus a health-focused narrative. We interviewed stakeholders from across, more than 100 stakeholders from across different organizations across various countries and different contexts. And through this, we came up with quite a difference in narrative. And a few examples here that you can see is moving from we need to feed the world to the world feeds itself, a world in which citizens and communities grow their own foods with dignity, retaining the rights to their products and access to markets. From food as a commodity to healthy and sustainable diets as a public good, and where local and regional food systems resilience is prioritized. From food systems, from decision-making by the elite few to citizen participation and democratically accountable institutions. From a focus on silver bullet solutions to support for a diversity of solutions appropriate for a diversity of contexts. A key question of this session is about how the pandemic has influenced policies and measures towards healthier and more resilient food systems. COVID-19 is a wake-up call to shift away from this prevailing narrative. We are seeing growing evidence that our industrial food systems are not fit for purpose, and yet there is not enough political leadership. Next year will be a critical year for decision makers. The Committee on World Food Security will adopt voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. The Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, will adopt a new framework for halting biodiversity loss and restoring nature. And there will be a first ever UN Food System Summit. Finally, COP26 will be the most important climate summit since the landmark Paris Agreement was agreed in 2015. In order to build real resilience and equity into food systems anywhere in the world, leaders and decision makers must choose the pathways that lead us towards a sustainable, equitable, ecological recovery with health at the center. Last month, we launched a call to action for governments with 14 recommendations for supporting healthy food systems, which were informed by the stakeholder process that I mentioned earlier. This government guide to action is complemented by a sister publication highlighting 13 case studies from around the world. Each of these case studies addresses a variety of determinants of human health and supports many of the recommendations in the government guide. Let's take the initiatives in India and Rwanda as two examples. Deccan Development Society, a grassroots organization of Dalit and tribal women, harnesses traditional crops and food knowledge to improve the nutrition and livelihoods across its 5,000 plus members and their communities. Subsidized rice and wheat have discouraged the cultivation of traditional grains, which have negatively affected the nutrition of rural people, especially women and children. They adapted India's national public distribution system, which provides subsidized grains to the poor to support locally adapted coarse grains such as millet, rather than wheat and rice. And then if you tuned into day one of this forum, you have heard from Solomon Makuza speak about his organization, Gardens for Health International in Rwanda, where more than a third of children under 5 are malnourished due to a lack of micronutrients in diets based on 1 or 2 staple crops. His organization promotes dietary and crop diversification by partnering with government-run health centers to reach mothers. Both of these initiatives support multiple determinants of health and underpin 11 of the 14 recommendations in the government guide. From all of the case studies and interviews, we have identified the following lessons. First, governments that have a vision and engage multiple actors to tackle key determinants of health have the most impact. Governments must tackle the social economic determinants of good health by focusing on poverty, inequality, and social exclusion. Policies that support regenerative and ecological agricultural practices are crucial. Governments must engage and involve citizens to ensure policies are culturally relevant and tailored to local and regional conditions. Policies must be integrated and link the full value chain from production to consumption, with healthy, sustainable, and culturally appropriate diets at the center. And finally, collaboration with a range of actors is crucial to delivering long-lasting and systemic impact. Addressing the key determinants of healthier food systems will enable governments to deliver on their international commitments, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the UN Decade for Action on Nutrition. In closing, it's time and it is possible to transform our food systems for human and planetary health. Deep and lasting change can only come when the multiple sectors and actors together seek a collective path forward. Such coordinated action will simultaneously improve our health, food security, and nutrition, while reducing pressure on land, regenerating our ecosystems, and tackling climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patty. Very, very nice to see that sort of synthesis of thinking and the tools and materials articulated in that way. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'm under strict orders to finish at 1 p.m. sharp Nairobi time. So that leaves us, by my watch, 12 minutes. So I have some questions in the chat for Mark and Patty, and I have a couple of my own for Tamang and Tayang. But if there are other questions for Tamang and Tayang from the audience, please do put those in the chat and I'll raise those instead. So perhaps first, if I go to Mark, so quite a lot of interest in your concept of farm without farmers and discussion of power structures. It was also noted that the interest of the young in farming is limited, and a question of whether regenerative farming kind of gives an opportunity to reinvigorate interest of youth in farming, and if so, what kind of government policies can help support regenerative farming. And in particular, I'm maybe mispronouncing, but Oladejo from Nigeria is very interested in his own garden, how to improve biodiversity and farming and garden. And I think that speaks to people's general interest in farming. So how do we kind of push against this retreat of youth's interest in farming? Over to you, Mark.
Right, thanks. Yeah, there are many issues, and I suppose I've only got a few minutes. I did just want to really appreciate Jyoti, if I'm pronouncing it right, Jyoti's input on the sort of cultural and ethnic foods. And we have a program at University of Pretoria analyzing in a similar way indigenous African foods. And my colleagues, so maybe there's South-South cooperation possible there. My colleague from that always says, you know, we get told about this healthy Mediterranean diet, where's the healthy African diet? And of course, you know, the diet that people had in a particular context was based on what could grow in that context, what worked ecologically in that context. So all of these things are linked. And we know the problem of, for example, in Africa, the promotion of bread is a problem for non-wheat growing countries. And it brings me back to just to use one example, there are so many, but Kentucky Fried Chicken. You know, the problem is that companies like Kentucky Fried Chicken spend enormous amounts on advertising and pushing particular unhealthy, often unhealthy foods. And so the top food companies in the world are some of the biggest spenders on advertising. So that's another form of power where they're shaping what people eat and want to eat. And then they will turn around and tell us that they're responding to consumer demand. So yeah, so to emphasize, you know, and of course what these companies are doing is also promoting an homogeneous kind of form because it fits for them. Kentucky Fried Chicken in Tanzania has to get approval for every product from the head office in the USA, you know, and that's partly why they don't want to bother going to local farmers. And of course, they want to sell only one kind of homogeneous product. Whereas everything we're hearing about agrobiodiversity requires us to have, you know, local solutions in local context. The garden in Nigeria, sorry, I forgot the name, but, you know, what can work in that garden and be more diverse? And of course, there's a lot of experience and knowledge we can find online around permaculture, agroecology, and so on that one can apply in one's garden. But we have to address power. And one of the things I wanted, because we can have the nice ideas, and I liked, you know, what Patty said around what the discourse we need to move from to what we need to move to, but what's shaping the practice? And one of the things that's happening is that with the concentration of wealth and ownership within the food system, that is also concentrating political power. And so we're seeing a very big influence of the largest corporations and investment firms in policy making in Africa, in Asia, around the world. And this is one of the things we have to counter. So we have to be quite careful of this idea of multi-stakeholderism where we'll sit together around the table, because we're not equal at that table. And unless we address that inequality, the outcomes of a multi-stakeholder process can be very skewed. We have to be careful of this notion, do only what the African farmer or African government wants, because what is shaping that? And I've seen the way, you know, fertilizer companies sponsor farmer associations and so on. You go to a farmer association meeting in Burkina Faso and you're going to see Yara and fertilizer companies on the t-shirts people are wearing. They're literally putting clothes on farmers. So power is there influencing those outcomes. You have to be careful of that. And that makes us have to also be, you know, well, we need the government to act, but we have to be clear on what's influencing governments. So certainly I think in terms of government action, governments must create an enabling space to build on what people are doing themselves as well, in particular local contexts. So I don't think we can easily impose any solution from outside. We know that there's not one size fits all solutions. So we need to look at what does that small farmer, often outside the NGO intervention or government intervention, do? What works for them in that context? And how can we build on and embrace that? So build on what people are doing and build especially on what women are doing, what is working for women in that context. That's what, so I know I have to stop. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Mark. I'm sure we could keep discussing, but yeah, very interesting, and thanks for those observations. I just wanted, seeing as you mentioned the role of advertising and kind of some driving consumption patterns, that's something that also Tayan picked up on, but didn't really have time to elaborate on. So you mentioned, Tayan, in your discussion, consumption patterns and food branding. So I just wondered if you'd like to elaborate a little bit on what is going on in that space in Bhutan.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think particularly, I think the food branding, I think as rightly said by the earlier commenter, I think we're really getting, I think the consumers are really getting overwhelmed with the advertisements and all that. So many a time in most countries, what we see is we often don't even promote or talk about the local recipes or local food that that are so popular actually. So probably this particular year actually gives us an opportunity to go back and revisit our own food system, and if we could do a branding of the local food diets or the recipes that we have, I think it might play positive. That's what we're thinking of. You know, if we really want to look at the transformation of the food system, for example, not only in Bhutan, even elsewhere. When we ask kids, even now in the schools, you know, where do you get the milk from? Normally we hear it either the fridge or the Tetra Pak, for example. They are really disillusioned that there's no cow in the system, you know, that gives milk. So probably educating and coming back to branding and advertisement, even if not for the commercial purpose, at least for the knowledge purpose, so that our future generation know that the food can be produced in our own local community or in the landscape. So that's the idea that we were trying to talk about. Thank you, William.
Okay, thank you very much, Tayan. So now a question for Jyoti, and Susan in the chat has raised the question that I was going to ask, and that's about the push for organic farming broadly defined in India. So you yourself, you're from Sikkim, and that receives a lot of attention, but we also hear a lot about zero budget natural farming in Andhra Pradesh. So with the very short time available, could you perhaps say a couple of words about what you think is driving this push for organic in India, and what you see the future in terms of application in other states?
Yes, Sikkim has a success story of the organic farming 4 years ago, and this is the first state. And the Honorable Prime Minister of India is also citing the example of Sikkim. And I hope that most of the states in India are adopting that, the organic farming, and I think the Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, those who are located in the Himalayas, and few states in South, they are already adopting that also. And it has to come in the legislations, because as you know that there is a willpower in the government, but it has, in the democracy, it has to interpret it in the legislations. So they must be working on that also. Of course, there are some forces who do not want to have organic farming, because once it is organic farming, you have to completely ban the inorganic, the pesticides, which are very cheap and accessible by the farmers and all. You know, the LTs also. Because once you have organic, you have to have a strategy for that also. Everything else also. And mostly as a microbiologist, because the most important thing is the biofertilizers also, the thing. So this is still being, you know, under considerations and all things. I hope that it may take time, but we're in the right way and all. Once we have organic, then we have organic food. And the price is also quite, you know, the organic in Sikkim also, that we get an organic product, and some products coming from outside Sikkim. The people prefer that because that is cheaper. The inorganic products are cheaper than the organic. So that is also very important, you know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jyoti. I have Patty, I'd like to give you the last word, perhaps in just 1 minute before we close. And the question for you about the new narrative and the role of power within that. So apologies if you could just keep it as short as possible, and perhaps give an observation on that before I pass back to Kerstin.
Thank you. Well, I agree with what Mark has said earlier. It's in we did a full narrative that we had launched over the summer. And part of that was actually at the top of that was really power and accountability being key to this. And that is what is keeping and driving the current narrative and preventing that shift from happening. So unless we have that new vision about, as what Fidel had mentioned earlier, like we need a new vision, but there also needs to be that vision as how does power shift in that? And what is the role of engaging a broader set of stakeholders in sharing that power, in actually changing our governance process so that it's not just, you know, consultation, but actually it's really sharing of power in how you design solutions, how you implement the solutions, how you allocate resources. Unless there is really a shift in terms of how this kind of process is done, especially at kind of government level, we're not going to see the type of shift that we need in our food systems.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you to all our panelists. I hope you agree it's been a very interesting discussion and a lot of issues, thought-provoking issues raised. So it's been my pleasure to facilitate, and I'll pass back to Kerstin to take us forward. Thank you again, Mark, Jyoti, Tayan, and Patty. Well done.
Thank you very much, Will, for an excellent session. It has been, these have been truly remarkable 3 days, and you brought us to an astounding final session. It's very difficult, and this is why I am so happy that I will now be able to give over to Ling Shu to share the closing remarks, because I find myself a bit lost for words. It's just been, you know, exceeded all of our expectations these 3 days, and the sincerity and the expertise that has come into these discussions has been mind-blowing. So yes, I find myself a bit lost for words. So that's why I'm passing over to Ling Shu.
Thank you, Kerstin. I think what you've said is exactly what I felt. So while you're preparing yourself, I should say that, you know, there's an old saying, the best of friends must part. So after these 3 days of not sharing the issues of our content, I think it's really inspiring that despite the multiple challenges we're facing, there are good practice and success stories and solutions that we can possess and for exchange and replicate probably where it's needed. So I hope our colleague from IFAD is here. So let me just invite Mr. Matteo Macicio, if I pronounce it incorrectly, bear with me, please, to give a closing remark as a partner, because Matteo is the head of International Fund for Agricultural Development, East Asian Regional Hub, and the country representative China. And his responsibilities include managing the development and strategies to reduce extreme rural poverty and advocating for an enhancement of national government programs that improve the access of poor rural people to natural resources, agricultural technologies, financial services, markets, employment opportunities, and enterprises development. I guess financial services is one aspect we have not been talked that much. Mr. Mauricio, are you ready to give a closing remark?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and apologize for being a few minutes late, but I was in fact on negotiations in the other room. For me, it was it's a great pleasure to be here to close these 3 days workshop and to reflect on some of the discussion you had over the past 3 days and some of the key messages that emerged over the past 3 days. Let me also take this opportunity to thank UNDP, UNEP, UN Women, IFPRI, ICIMOD, and the Global Alliance for the Future of Food for having organized this this webinar. I was trying to somehow collect what could have been the key messages of this event, and I came up with basically four messages. The first one, from my perspective, was the recognition that there is a strong correlation on a number of development topics that are not necessarily and usually considered together. And I'm referring to, well, of course, poverty and food security are often correlated, but issues related to agrobiodiversity, climate change, conflicts, economic growth, basically the understanding and recognition that all these different dimensions are interrelated, interlinked, correlated, and one has an impact, an effect on the others. The second message or the second point that I would like to make is a bit on the recognition of somehow the tension when we talk about global food system. As on the one hand, we know that we need to increase food production in order to feed the growing population. So the pressure to increase, to improve our food system. On the other hand, the recognition, the acknowledgement, the awareness that global food systems have a strong impact on our resources, on energy, water. They're responsible for emission of greenhouse gases. So basically, how to reconcile, how to balance these two dimensions. The third point I would like to make, and this is perhaps from a more IFAD perspective, related to the previous one, is the importance of the role of smallholder farmers and smallholder agriculture in reducing the stress on global food systems. We know that smallholder agriculture is responsible for 3/4 of the food production in the world, and basically by making the smallholder production more sustainable, more resilient to climate change, more demanding on resources like water, energy, we contribute to make the global food system more sustainable. So the role of smallholder agriculture in making more sustainable global food systems. And in this regard, I think a key point is the role of agrobiodiversity in doing that. Agrobiodiversity has basically proven, and I think this has been discussed over the past day, to improve and make food system more resilient. And the fourth and last point is somehow again the recognition that came from the experience of COVID-19, the fact that COVID-19 had a major impact on the vulnerable segments of society. While everyone was potentially prone to be infected by the virus, it was basically the most vulnerable that were the most impacted because they had capacity to cope with the effects of a shock. And here the lesson is that we need to make those segments of society more resilient to shocks. And I'm talking about shocks in general. Today, this year, it was an epidemic. Tomorrow, it can be a natural disaster, unfavorable weather conditions, or a drop in commodity prices, or a disease, or the job, or the loss in job. So basically, the importance of making vulnerable households more resilient to shocks. And this is somehow how I understood and how I captured the key messages from these 3 days discussion. So I conclude here. I thank everyone for the participation, for the contribution in this event, and I wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you very much for your remarks, and then I think we hear you loud and clear by laying out the four points, but importantly, build more resilient societies, and that really can be resistant to all kind of shocks. Being today pandemic, other type of crisis. I think this is one of the core kind of objective of this webinar. Thank you very much. And thank you also for IFAD to be part of this engagement. And I hope this is the beginning of a longer term collaboration. In fact, we are collaborating with IFAD in China, doing some, with UN Women as well on the, Qinghai, empowering women farmers for improving the economic resilience there. And we partnered with UN Women, but we pushed for linking up with IFAD project there for the poverty alleviation. We brought it into more kind of gender dimension. So I'm happy just to share with you that the ongoing collaboration we're having with IFAD now. Now, Kerstin, are you ready? For your final remark on this, after this exciting 3 days of this webinar. I think we are the ones who benefited the most, but we do have some work to do. So now the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you very much. No, thank you. No, thank you again to everyone. And I think it's as I said, it's been an amazing 3 days where we have covered, the scales of matters, of issues that we have covered is absolutely tremendous. We have gone from root and base to the power structures of multilateral and multi-corporate entities, companies. We have addressed the political economy of food systems. We have looked at the individual choices that we make when it comes to nutritious food. We have addressed an unfolding, as was depicted as an unfolding crisis of care, and all of this we have done with what I find so very interesting, where we all have come together to make good on that promise that we agreed on in Rio, one of those pillars of our SDGs, one of those fundaments of our SDGs, which is leaving no one behind. And I think this has been where we come together now. And it's not only among us human beings, but it's also about leaving none of the species behind in our quest to provide sustainable food systems, food production systems that provide nutritious food and that allow communities to choose how they produce that food. So it's and so it is for us, and I pick up on what Ling Shu was saying. It is for us now to decide on how do we come up with a very concrete way forward. And I liked Mr. Gurung's suggestion of a much more permanent South-South forum on food security and agrobiodiversity. And I think that's something that we should think about, because I also take the point that we cannot be siloed. And here I think we have already walked the talk during these 3 days. We have brought together our partners, and we have brought together an amazing just spectrum of expertise. So we are already breaking down those silos in addressing these, and in so doing, I would rather also picking up on an expression that we heard this morning. I think we can walk very far together. It's just now for us to tease out what are the first steps on that journey. And I think we do have the elements, but it is now for Ling Shu and myself and partners and teams to propose how to move forward. One of our milestones along this journey will be the Food Summit. So we will need to concretely think about how we present what we have discussed during these 3 days, what our recommendations are from these 3 days, and how we can make those play out during the Food Summit as well. So I think I will leave it at this. I would also, on our part, like to thank very much our partners, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, ICIMOD, IFAD, IFPRI, UN Women, UNDP. I would like to thank all the speakers, all the panelists, all the participants for sticking with us and for providing your just amazing expertise. I think we have, as Ling Shu said, it is to our benefit. So thank you very much to everyone. I hope you will be hearing from us soon on how we take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerstin. I would like to echo what you said by thanking these people, but I wanted to bring up another. We should thank our tech team who is behind us for those kind of marvelous support we're having for these 3 days. And that's one thing in addition to all the panelists. So I wanted to know, it's 2 minutes past the planned time. So I just wish that all stay safe but remain connected. So we'll come back to you in the near future. Thank you very much. Thank you. We still have nearly 80 people by the end of the day 3. So I'm so proud of all of us. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.